Hello and welcome everyone to llmdotmd. Today we'll be testing the newly released Qwen 3.6 from Alibaba Labs. We'll be testing the 35 billion mixture of experts model, which should perform incredibly well in our eGPU setup. Powering our eGPU setup is an AMD RX 7900 XT from Asus with 20 GB of VRAM that should give us just enough breathing room to squeeze in a Q4 quantization of the model, plus a solid context window. So let's see what we can do. For today's testing, we'll be focusing on two specific Q4 quantization from Unsloth. First up is the IQ-XS quantization at 19.5 GB on disk. This one should fit entirely on the GPU and enable full GPU offload. Second, we have the Q4K XL quantization. This one comes in a bit heavier, 24.15 GB on disk, meaning we'll need to offload some layers to the CPU to make it run. And also, since we are running an AMD card, we will be exploring backend performance for both the native ROCm backend as well as the more universal Vulkan backend to see how they stack up and if there is any differences. To measure all this, we will be using a handy tool from GitHub called llmdotmd by Google. It gives us accurate llama bench style metrics right out of the box with practically zero setup. So let's see what we can do. Switching to LM Studio, here are the settings I will be using for the IQ for XS quantization. Basically, I did some runs behind the scenes. I maxed out the context length to the maximum I can use while not degrading performance. I also enabled flash attention and KV cache quantization at Q8, and these settings, like you see here, enable us to have a good performance that we'll be checking later on in the video. Okay, let's start by looking at some results, but first here is the llmdotmd command I'm using to generate these results. I'm specifying the base URL as the URL of LM Studio server. As for the model name, you can specify anything here, given that llmdotmd will use the model loaded in LM Studio. And lastly, for the depth parameter, I'm specifying values ranging from 0 to 65K to be able to see how the model scales with the context size and how prompt processing and token generation scales up with different token context sizes. Let's start by seeing the ROCm results for the IQ4XS quantization. Right out of the gate, the generation speeds are very good. We start at about 75 tokens per second, and even at 8K context, it holds up steady at 73. Pushing it all the way to 65K context still gives us a very usable 52 tokens per second, but keep an eye on the prompt processing. It runs beautifully early on, peaking at over 2000 tokens per second at 8K. However, once we hit that massive 65K context limit, prompt processing takes a heavy dip, dropping all the way down to 700 tokens per second. Here is the data represented in a more readable way, and you can clearly see the heavy dip at 65K context window. And as for the cause, I think it is related to VRAM usage. As you can see here from the screenshot, ROCm is using about 22 gigabytes, 22.5 gigabytes of VRAM out of the 20 gigabytes we have actually on our RX 7900 XT, and so that means that some parts of the execution is spilled to the system RAM, which explains the dip in the performance. Now let's look at the same model using the universal Vulkan backend. You might expect a performance drop without the native ROCm, but Vulkan holds its own surprisingly well. Base generation speed starts slightly lower at 64 tokens per second, but stays incredibly stable as we increase the context. The real highlight here is what happened at 65K context depth. Vulkan actually beats ROCm in text generation, pushing almost 55 tokens per second, but the craziest part is what happened to prompt processing. Vulkan absolutely crushes ROCm here, jumping from about 700 tokens per second prompt processing all the way to nearly 1200, which is a massive win for an out-of-the-box backend such as Vulkan. And here are the Vulkan results, but in graph form, and you can clearly see the improvement in 65K context results. You can see an improvement in both token generation and prompt processing, and I think it is related to VRAM usage. Vulkan is clearly more efficient as it is using only 19 gigabytes of VRAM out of the 20 total available to the RX 7900 XC, which enables it to deliver better performance than ROCm. Switching back to LM Studio, here are the settings I will be using for the Q4K XL suite of benchmarks. Given that this quant exceeds 20 gigabytes of VRAM, we are forced to offload some layers to the CPU to free up memory and be able to extend the context length for these specific tests. I did some runs behind the scenes and I landed on these settings. So by offloading 8 layers to the CPU, we have enough room to fit 65K context length alongside the rest of the layers offloaded to the GPU, still using flash attention and KV cache quantization as Q8. This is the only change I made. And one other thing, given that we are offloading layers to the CPU, I have an Core Ultra 7 255HX and I have 8 P cores, so I have set here 8 as the CPU thread pool size to only use the P cores and not use the E cores, because they don't have the same instruction sets and cache sizes. So after some tests, performance degrades when we switch to the E cores. So sticking to the P cores is the best strategy. Now, looking back at the results for the benchmark runs for the Q4K XL, it's a little bit underwhelming. I think we hit a bottleneck due to the limitation of the USB4 eGPU setup, because both Vulkan and ROCm backends deliver practically the same performance, around 30 tokens per second in terms of token generation, and around 300 tokens per second in terms of prompt processing. ROCm is the better choice in this setup, but in my opinion it doesn't matter, because at the end we are hitting a wall in terms of transfer speed between the CPU and the GPU, so the performance is very degraded, and you should switch back to a lower quant to be able to fit the whole model in the GPU instead. It will deliver a better experience overall and a better quality. So to conclude, using an eGPU setup to run local LLMs is feasible, given that you stick to LLMs that fit in VRAM totally, but because once you exceed that, you start spilling to system memory and you hit the bottleneck caused by the bandwidth limitation of the connection between the GPU and the system, which is not ideal and not recommended. So that's it for this first suite of benchmarks. I have a lot of other tests planned, including using the internal RTX 5070 Ti laptop GPU that I have internally alongside the external GPU, and try to push the boundary of what we can do with such a setup. So if you think this is interesting, please subscribe and leave your comments and suggestions in the comment section down below. It's also important to share your results as well. I have shared with you the comment I used to run the benchmarks, so it will be interesting to see what you are getting on your own hardware. So see you in the next video.